Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are going to talk about how to escape the comfort zone. Now, the comfort zone is so comfortable. It's where we'd like to stay, but obviously, we can't really grow in that sense. So I'm curious, Donovan, what are your thoughts, or what are your initial thoughts when it comes to breaking free from the comfort zone?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to really think about is why, or what's the context, right?
Mhm.
Because there are certain times where your comfort zone kind of gets you trapped. And in a sense of, you see people, and I've been guilty of this in my life as well,
Mhm.
um, doing the things that they've always been doing, but they're not really happy, or like not always been doing, but have been doing for some period of time,
Right.
but it's easier than doing something else. And I'll speak from personal experience. So there was a job that I was in that
Mhm.
I didn't really like. I didn't really feel that fulfilled. I didn't really feel like my
Right.
career was going anywhere. Um, and it took feeling that way for at least 6 months before I was willing to actually do something about it. And maybe we can talk about the details of that later.
Mhm.
But um, for the entirety of that time period, I kind of felt like, well, I don't really like this. It's not that awesome, but I'm too scared to quit and do something else. I'm too scared to do all this other stuff. So, um, I think going back to what I was saying, I think the context really matters a lot, right? It really matters uh, if you actually need to leave your comfort zone for some reason, right? There may be
Mhm.
instances where, oh, my life is set up super awesome and I'm very comfortable and
Mhm.
I'm really happy with everything that's going on. And then maybe you don't need to do that as much. It kind of depends on your aspirations and what else is going on in your position. But I'd be curious to hear sort of some of your thoughts.
Yeah, my initial thoughts is that, change is inevitable. It's like, yes, we can get into certain routines and maybe we like that, but I think um eventually we have to confront change and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I think we have to get comfortable with the idea of being comfortable in order to grow. So as far as like escaping the comfort zone, I think there is some context. Like, yeah, if you're I would maybe like to be the devil's advocate, you kind of put it in the context of like if you don't like your life or you're unhappy at your job, then it would be good for you to break free from your comfort zone. But I would say, I think maybe also I agree with that sentiment, but also maybe it would be helpful if you are comfortable and you're happy with your life. That would also be beneficial. Like, it depends on if you value growth and developing yourself. And I think, for some people, maybe that's not a big value for them. So they're perfectly content to stay where they are with their life, because they like it. And, if you don't want to see what might be different, it might expand you or to help you figure out what you like or don't like, then, I feel like that is disadvantage for yourself. But, just my starting initial thoughts.
I think you brought a couple important points out, and one of them is that change is inevitable, and it's something that I
Mhm.
actually in Mindscaping wrote about a decent amount.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, if you sit in your comfort zone forever,
Mhm.
at some point, life is going to change in some way that forces you to change. And
Right.
if you have not pushed your boundaries anywhere at any point, it's going
Mhm.
to hit you really hard. So it's a lot um, easier of a transition just if you've done some intentional pushing of some of your boundaries and some of your comfort zones, so that when one of those changes does show up, you can go, okay, well, this is very uncomfortable, but at least I have some recent experience managing discomfort and have some options and whatnot. So I think another important metric or piece for us to talk about is sort of the scale of discomfort that you're willing to face, right? And maybe
Mhm.
that's more the key piece where context fits in, which is, do you need to change your entire life? Do you need to, quit your job and start over in a new field and all this other stuff, which is what I did in that other story? Or is it something more like, hey, you know what? Like, I've been going to the same restaurant for forever. I don't really want to try something new, but maybe I will, just to like push a very small boundary. Maybe that's a little bit more important or useful place for us to focus, is sort of the scope of the discomfort that you take on.
Right. I like that you use that like restaurant example of, trying something new off the menu, because what if it ends up being something you like more than your favorite thing that you always get? You wouldn't know unless you try. And maybe you end up hating it, but then at least you'll stop wondering of like, what if there's something else on that menu that I would like more? And for me, an example of like a major change in my life, and breaking out of my comfort zone was, I think about that time I moved from Seattle to Maryland to, in to be continue being with my partner that got a job out there essentially. And that was leaving, the friends that I love, my comfort zone of, I love living in Seattle. I have many fond memories of it. But, I also wanted to, expand myself and, see what it would be like to grow a business out there, as well as explore the East Coast. There was a lot of uncertainty. And I think just when it comes to like the starting point of when you want to explore getting outside of your comfort zone, to just acknowledge that there is going to be uncertainty. I didn't know if I could make friends out there. I did sort of, maybe not as deeply as friendships as I did. Well, eventually I did when I broke up with that partner. I did because that breakup in itself expanded myself to get out of my comfort zone and meet new people, which was helpful in itself. But I have no regrets about doing that, because it did lead me to my current fiance, or now my husband. We just got married. I keep forgetting my my husband now. So I mean, it all worked out in the end. But even those times that were difficult and uncomfortable and painful, even I can look back on it now knowing that it helped shape me into who I am today, which I'm very grateful for. So I think it's also like perception of, what is your relationship with uncertainty, and to acknowledge that you can't predict anything in life. But even when you're going through difficult times, that when you reflect on it later, you can trust that you'll gain something out of that experience somehow.
Yeah, and I think that's really, I don't know, this is going to be too hard of a push, but it's one of the main ways that you can gain experience, right? Is if you're doing the same thing all the time, by definition, you're not getting new experiences. So you're not able to sort of learn the differences between certain things, or like, it's really broad, but without being willing to step into that uncertainty from time to time, you don't really know what is optimal and what's not. You know what I mean? Like, if you had stayed, and a lot of these decisions are reversible, maybe not immediately, but in some way, right? Like, you could have gone out there and said like, you know what, I really don't like this, and moved back. And if, that's one thing that I found interesting in my own journey as well, is as I look back at some of these like comfort zone, oh, I'm so afraid, like, oh, what if I do this? Well, what if this thing is gone, or whatever else? There are some decisions like that, but a bunch of them have been reversible. Like that job that I was super terrified to quit, I could have easily, with the amount of experience I had at the time, just found, a year later, another job roughly equivalent, or potentially even just went back to the company and said like, can I have my old job back? And it's plausible that I could have gotten it anyway. So sometimes there's this fear, I feel like, around getting out of the comfort zone of like, oh, if I move past this thing and I try something else, that's it, it's over. Again, sometimes that might actually be true, but a lot of times it's really not. A lot of these decisions are reversible in a sense, or like, you can walk it back. So that's one of the things, at least, that has helped me. And I guess I'm kind of shifting the conversation, but that has helped me, now that I have some of those experiences, step out of my comfort zone in the future by doing sort of like the same mental exercise of like, hey, is this undoable for the most part? Yeah.
Yeah. hmm Yeah, that's great. I think that's a good way to kind of frame it in your mind, of that, like, it doesn't have to be as, if you go for this thing, it doesn't have to be as catastrophic if it doesn't work out as you might make it out to be in your mind. I'd be curious, what are your thoughts on like other, practical tips of like people who do want to like expand themselves, get out of their comfort zone, but their like fear is just smacking them in the face and they just can't seem to like move past it. What would you want to say to those types of people?
The first couple things that come to mind, one is to get really, really concrete. So
Mhm.
I'm just going to keep using this
Yeah.
example of that job.
Yeah.
I didn't really like it. I didn't really know, what I wanted to do. I didn't really
Mhm.
know what the options were. I just kind of knew it wasn't working.
Mhm.
And when I was nebulous about it and in that space that I just described, it was really hard because I was like, oh, well, I'm going to quit. And what am I going to do? And what's going to happen? And all this stuff. And when I got concrete around, like, okay, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid that if I get rid of this job, I'm not going to be able to find any other job. I'm not going to be able to make any money. I'm going to end up just homeless or back, begging my family for money or something like that. Right.
Mhm.
Some sort of like, hey, I'm going to run out of money. That
Right.
was the main concern. And
Mhm.
once I got that concrete piece, it
Mhm.
was a lot easier for me to say, okay, well, how much money do I need? How much, or basically, like, how much money do I want to save to buy myself a certain amount of time? So, like, if I want 6 months, how much money exactly do I need to be able to say, like, I have 6 months worth of expenses and I don't have to work for that long, and then
Right.
I can figure it out from there.
Mhm.
So that's one piece. Another thing is, for a lot of the stuff that I've experienced or like hear from other people, finding the absolute smallest way that you can start breaking out of that comfort zone or start exploring the thing that you're interested in. Sometimes that might be easier than others, right? Like, there's not necessarily an easy way to uh, like you were saying, like, move somewhere, right?
Mhm.
As a sort of a partial or little choice, but you could do something like, before you choose to move out somewhere, go out there for a week or two,
Sure.
get some sort of an idea of the place that you're like intending to move to.
Mhm.
So I think things like that help you unravel some of the ambiguity, some of the uncertainty,
Mhm.
see some of the pieces. Again, not always an option, but a lot of times there are things you can do. I think that helps too, because, at least in my experience, one of the biggest problems to get out of the comfort zone is this huge ball of uncertainty. So the more pieces you can kind of take away, the smaller you can make it,
Mhm.
the less fear there is, or the more likely it is to, like, okay, I think I can move forward now. I have enough of these pieces put together.
Mhm.
I'm ready to move forward.
Mhm.
Those are some of my initial thoughts. I'd be curious what kind of tools or strategies you have on your end.
Yeah, yeah. Just before I offer my tools, I just wanted to comment on what you said, in that kind of what I was hearing, in that one of the things, like, there were actually two things that I heard mainly, is that, like, one, try like dipping your toe in the water if it's possible, like, just to test it out, so it kind of takes away a little bit of the uncertainty. Obviously, can't take it away all completely. And then the other thing that I heard was just kind of like thinking about, what would be like the worst case scenario. And when you really thought about it, it's just like, yeah, there's no way you would have ended up homeless because you have family and other things like that. So I think those are great ideas, to be able to confront your comfort zone. For me, as far as what I would do, is kind of like focus on what could be possible if I kind of break through the barrier, the wall that kind of stops me. Like, yeah, if I do this, there's risks that are going to be associated with it, but what do I have to gain if I do it? And there's no way that I will be able to gain what it is that I want if I take no action, or if I don't take the step outside of my comfort zone. And for me, it's like, I don't want to lose out on that opportunity of at least knowing one way or another, because maybe it could have been the best decision of my life. Maybe it made me $1 million, or help me, like, if I didn't take the risk of moving out to Maryland, I wouldn't have met my current husband. And so it's just like, yeah, risks, it all worked out. Obviously, not all risks work out, but it's one of those things that I heard a common saying that I liked is like, you don't know unless you ask. Like if you're wanting something and you don't ask for it, it's 100% no is the answer. But if you ask, then there's like a chance. There's a more likely maybe that's a 5% chance or a 1% chance, but that's better than 0% if you don't go for it or you don't try. So I'm like, well, I like my odds better if if I try for it, even if it doesn't work out or fail, but my odds are a lot better than if I did nothing at all. So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me to sort of I mean, we're basically hitting it from both sides, right?
Mhm.
One side is this sort of like, oh, okay, like how can I mitigate risk? And the other side is like, what do I stand to gain? And what do I stand to lose in terms of what I don't gain by not doing anything? That's a lot of negatives. But yeah, so that makes a ton of sense to me. And it's another thing too that um, has been useful for me. There's a interesting phenomenon that I want to like unpack a little bit and maybe talk about, which is sort of this idea of like pain threshold, right? Because I kind of feel like what I was talking about towards the beginning is like there's this certain amount of discomfort that it takes for a lot of people to start taking action.
Right. No, I
And
agree.
that's how a lot of people get stuck is they're at this like, oh, my life in general is like a 5, but a 5 is pretty okay.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not
Right.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't know. I don't have like a specific question or anything, but I kind of want to just like talk about that for a minute and unpack a couple layers of that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And that's what I see a lot of the times with, potential patients of mine who, they definitely need to be like dealing with high stress and anxiety for them to actually be motivated enough to pull the trigger and actually work with me, because working with me is a big commitment. But some people, it's just like, their anxiety sucks, but it's not like debilitating to the point where they can't function. So they're like, well, it's not that bad. And, there's work and there's commitment in having to do a program working with me. So it's just like they stay in this like, yeah, it's not that bad, but it's like not where they want to be, but it's not that bad. So I'll just be in this quasi like it's uncomfortable, but it's comfortable kind of a place. And it sometimes you gotta push on that pain a little bit for them to really take that action, which is kind of sad. I think it's varies person to person. Some people are willing to do something even if it's just like mild issues or not, but sometimes it takes a little bit more for them to realize, yeah, this isn't how I want to live my life. I want something more. I want something better than this. But as far as it really has to come from them and wanting that change for starters. The other thing is that they should also, I don't know if they're really evaluating like the cost of them not doing anything too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and tell me if it maps correctly, but
Yeah.
the way I think about it is like, um, if we're thinking about the sum total of pain or something, right?
Right.
Like, if you were to add up how just the total amount of unhappiness that will
Right.
build up from continuing to do the thing for the next 3 years, it's going to be much larger than the amount of, I'll say discomfort instead of unhappiness, but the amount of discomfort it take to get over that hurdle. I don't know if that maps to what you were trying to say, but that's like one of the ways that I have conceptualized it for myself to get over certain things. So I'm like, like you were saying, like, this isn't that bad. Like I can deal with this. This is fine.
Right.
Like fixing this would be like kind of a pain in the ass and not feel good. That's something that's helped me be like, no, but actually eventually in the long run, like the amount of suck that's going to come from this is going to be
Right.
greater than the amount if I just deal with it right now.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to kind of frame it too, because it's like thinking about like, oh, yeah, maybe it's not terrible. It's not like devastating, but what are the long-term impacts of staying in this uncomfortable or this, it's like comfortable but uncomfortable place, this like the mid-row, like, oh, 5 out of 10 pain, maybe like I'm not like that bad, but it's not that great. And it's like, yeah, maybe it starts to degrade your health. Maybe it starts to manifest as like physical symptoms. Maybe it destroy or slowly like pulls the thread on your relationship or your marriage. Like thinking about those impacts. And it's like, is that what you want? Because it's like, how is it affecting your life now? And if this continues on, what does that mean for you? Is that yeah, if you want to have this problem for another 5 years, 10 years, it's like, what's life gonna look like? Doesn't sound great to me. So yeah.
So you were talking about it a little bit, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's the full extent of the picture, but I'd be curious. You said, sometimes you can help people by pushing on like the pain points a little bit to get them to take action. I would be curious what sort of ways that actually happens, either if that's with clients or just people in your life, or like what you've seen actually have success. Because I can think of a couple different ways that you could do that. Anyway, I'll let you talk.
For me, like when I'm working, I always generally try to come from a place of not pushing people into anything, but to like discover it on their own. And that's the like, because if they're pushed into it, then they're like, oh well, you made me, I didn't really want to do this. It's like, it's got to be your decision 100%. So it's like really asking questions of, helping them see the cost of them staying where they are. If nothing changes, what does this mean if you stay in this like quasi like, oh, so you're having like panic attacks like 3 times a week? It's like, that doesn't sound great. I'm sorry. I have empathy for them, but at the same time, it's like, is that what you want to live with for like 10 more years? That doesn't sound like a great life. And just being real and authentic with them, coming from a place of like love and compassion, and that like, I don't want you to suffer for that long. I know I can help you. Maybe they realized, yeah, I don't want to suffer for that long either. But it's just being supportive, asking questions, and really helping them see. It's just kind of weighing the pros and cons. Like, what does it cost? What do you have to gain? And just kind of going through that thought process with them. Because I don't know if they necessarily do that themselves, because they're just focusing on, well, it's really not that bad. So, and that stops them from really exploring and digging deep with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me as just kind of a tool, especially when you mentioned like that you can't really push, right? You can't say like, your life sucks.
I know. How do you not see your life sucks? Do something about it. No, that doesn't usually work.
But it makes sense that, you kind of help foster some self-reflection and basically like some deeper looks at, because I think that's one of the other things that gets people trapped is they sort of feel the pain but don't ever spend the time really sitting down and being like, okay, how much is this impacting my life relative to other options? Like you're saying, like how much worse is having panic attacks multiple times a week compared to not having them at all? And if you don't really think about it deeply or spend time with it, you can just sort of plaster over those types of things and be like, it's not really that bad.
Right. Or they use like the sorry to interrupt. They use the like, well, other parts of my life are great. So, so what if this one thing really sucks? Like, yeah, I have a supportive husband. So, yeah, it's okay if I have panic attacks 3 times a week because I have a support system. Kind of like, that's great. That's awesome. But,
yeah, that's interesting. I would imagine that's fairly common to find some sort of justification for like, oh, I don't need to do this other work because whatever else, something unrelated. And it actually leads me to a topic I wanted to talk about, which is I'd be curious if you see people sort of stuck because they want an imaginary path that doesn't exist, which is to say that like, because I've seen this before where it's basically like, oh, I wish I didn't have panic attacks. And it's like, cool. Like, that's not really an option. Like, it's not really an option that it just disappears. Either you continue to deal with them or you do all the work it takes to unwind them.
Right. Yeah.
Like, there's not really this third magic path of just
It
like,
goes away.
I hope this problem is just not here anymore. And I actually like,
Yeah.
as I talk about it and think about it, like I've seen and heard that kind of thing a lot. Like, wow, I wish I wasn't so bad with money. And it's like, well, you're either going to continue to be bad with money or you're going to take the steps to learn how to manage your money. Like,
I know, it's got to be one or the other.
third step doesn't really exist.
Right.
So I think that's another thing that I'd be curious about is if you've seen sort of getting realistic with people is something that has to happen or part of that process.
I've actually developed that over time because I switched from doing like pay as you go consults because I feel like people don't realize the extensive work it does take to heal like stress and anxiety, and that like, you know, and it kind of helped me shift my, because I want to treat people to get them results, long-term lasting results. And I think when people come in with this expectation that like, oh, well, just give me a supplement to like fix all my problems. And I'm very upfront about like, hey, you know, yes, I'm a naturopathic doctor. You know, I may or may not be able to get you off your medication if that's your goal. But I don't want to just swap out a pharmaceutical pill for a natural pill. It's just like, there's a lot more to healing anxiety than just swapping one pill for another, whether it's natural or not, kind of a thing. So if you want to actually work with me, don't just expect some supplements. That's supplemental to lifestyle change. I'm going to really hound you about doing those lifestyle changes because that's really the thing that I see makes the difference. And it's hard. It's like basic things that we all know sometimes, like eating healthy, exercising, meditating, like things we know, but we don't do. And I'm like, well, let's work on what's getting in your way of doing those things. Rather than just expecting like this pill to resolve your problems without you going deeper and exploring what's going on, as well as doing like healing your inner child and really doing that self-awareness work. And sometimes they don't want to do that. And I'm like, you know, I'll meet you where you're at, but you have to be willing to take action. And you have to realize that healing is a journey. It's not like an overnight quick fix. And if you expect that, then this isn't the place for you. Sorry. And I don't know if you can really find a place like that. And I would be very skeptical if someone's like promoting that, saying they'll magically resolve all your panic attacks and anxiety with just like a pill. Maybe, I don't know, it could exist. But, you know, I've gotten really good results by, you know, having people do the work. And yeah, it takes commitment. So they have to be committed.
Yeah, well, I think you touched on something that's very common, which is just hoping for that magic pill, right? We can use that in a literal or metaphorical sense.
I love that.
Yeah,
my problems. Yeah.
And I think maybe that's another piece that can get people stuck in their comfort zone is just waiting for something like that. Right. And it's just so interesting for me to see sort of the difference between the aspirations people have and the actions they're actually willing to take. It's a little sad too, but you know, you hear stuff like, oh, I want to be a musician. And it's like, do you practice every day? Do you try to land shows? Do you like, what are you doing for that? And it's like, oh no, like I just want it to happen. And you know, sometimes it's very like innocent daydreaming type stuff, but sometimes that's the type of stuff that like really eats people up and makes them feel like horrible and like they haven't accomplished anything and they can't live out their dreams and they can't do all this other stuff. So it's just yeah, I guess people just need to be aware of you know, for most of the things you want to accomplish or fix or change in your life, someone has probably paved something of a similar path. And maybe that's part of the problem too, is a lot of times people that are successful or have really good lives or whatever else, you only see the outcome, right? Like once someone's rich and successful, you just see them as rich and successful. You don't see any of the other work. You don't see any of the other steps or anything else. So if you're not in that process or used to that process, or you don't know those steps or whatever else, it may be easy to think like, oh, there is this magic pill out there somewhere that can just skip all the steps. Cause like, how did this person get there?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just like, it's a process and they have to be willing to commit to the process to be able to grow and expand. But, I get that not everyone's quite in that place or coming to terms with that, because we want to hold on to the fantasy that, yeah, it could be easy. And maybe sometimes it is. It depends on what it is. But usually it's like, oh, growth only happens out of discomfort. It's like, yeah, it's not going to be easy all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you actually just touched on something really important, which
Mhm.
is, there are also a lot of stories of people in sort of this like low level discomfort or pain or whatever,
Mhm.
like sticking with this job that they don't really like to try
Yeah.
to like really make it work or whatever else. And then they quit and then they get just this huge rush of relief. And then within a few months, I've found something that is like substantially better for their well being and all sorts of other stuff
Mhm.
with little to no friction other than the choice to say, like, okay, I'm going to give up this other thing and try something new. Like there are tons and tons of sort of like a lot of our guests have said stuff like that where they,
Definitely.
had sort of this misery and then they just were like, I'm going to try something else. And it happened to work out. And maybe it took like 2 or 3 tries, right? Some of those stories, they
Yeah.
kind of bounced around. They did like a bunch of
Mhm.
other stuff. They couldn't quite get it or whatever. But, sort of to that point or what you mentioned, like, um, a lot of the times to get the growth, we're going to have to do a lot of hard work that's uncomfortable. But
Mhm.
some of these adjustments are actually really easy and feel really good really fast.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's totally possible. Absolutely. Although, it could be possible, like, yeah, maybe you don't get a job for a really long time too. There's risks with that. But I think it's just like, isn't it worth to not be in such, like, if you're in a really toxic work environment, that's just like slowly draining your livelihood and your desire to like move forward with life. And you just like, you finally have the courage to leave it, and you just have this weight off you, so you're not like dead inside every day. It's like, I think that's worthwhile, even though, yeah, you might have to deal with a new stress of finding a new job. But just being able to get away from such a negatively impactful thing, I think is a worthwhile, like, thing to try sometimes when it's like a soul sucking type of a job.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
it
no,
goes
go ahead.
back to full circle, right? Like some of the
Mhm.
stuff we were
Yeah.
talking about. So, then if you're scared about some of the pieces, you can get concrete
Mhm.
on like, here's what I'm afraid of. Here's what my options are. Here's
Mhm.
here's all the stuff I can do, and then start making progress from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I did want to add like one final thought is just like for our audience to recognize that, you know, escaping your comfort zone is building a muscle. So it doesn't happen
Mm-hmm.
easily or naturally. I think like the more you do it, the easier it gets for you to like get out of your comfort zone and do something new. It's just like, yeah, keep doing it. Then, maybe it's not necessarily being like, see ya, I'm out of this job, peace out, kind of a thing, because that is a big like consequence. But it's like starting small, of just like having the courage to ask for a raise. That's maybe less risky. I mean, yeah, the worst they could say is no. Unlikely that they would fire you over that, unless it's a really toxic environment, but that would be terrible. Maybe that may be for the best. But just like, yeah, start like exercising that muscle and realize that, you start to get more out of life, and it's worthwhile. And now I feel like I'm at a point where I've done it enough where most things don't really freak me out, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I need to be out of my comfort zone a little more. I'm too comfortable. I haven't pushed myself hard enough. I almost like strive to like have discomfort sometimes. Not all the time. I like being comfortable too, but if it goes on for too long, I'm like, I feel like I need to expand myself a little. Let me try a new class, or let me try a new thing that I know I'll be really awkward and uncomfortable at, kind of a thing.
Well, I think, adding those experiences up gives you control over the feeling instead of the feeling having control over you, right? When you bump
Right.
up against new things that you need to do or want to do or think might be interesting or whatever else,
Yeah.
when you don't really have that experience, it's more likely that the feeling is going to win and say,
Exactly.
like, hey, this is going to be uncomfortable, so don't do it, as
Mhm.
opposed to you getting to make the choice of, like, okay, this might be uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Like, I know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
Is the set of discomfort that I'm possibly going to face
Mhm.
worth whatever rewards are on the other side? And when you're in control of it, it feels a lot better than when you're trying to fight that feeling instead of being like, okay, discomfort's here. I know what that's like.
Yeah. And it kind of gave me a sense of freedom knowing that, like, hey, it's okay to be uncomfortable, and kind of a sense of freedom in that, like, hey, I could be like this really awkward looking person if I try this new sport or something. Look ridiculous at, but I actually have like acceptance and give myself space to look ridiculous, because that's part of growth. Just like, it's okay. Everyone has to suck in the beginning at most things, so that's kind of how life goes.
This could pull us in a very long
I
thread, so
know.
we don't need to walk down the whole thing. But
True.
it actually made me think of getting out of your comfort zone is one of the best ways to build confidence, because you
Mhm.
realize when you're
Right.
in those situations, the ones that don't necessarily go as planned, that feel
Mhm.
awkward or whatever else,
Yeah.
you realize that, like, oh, I can survive this. Like, this is fine. This is
Mhm.
just part of life. And then you realize, if you're starting a new sport or something, right? To use your
Mhm.
example, like, if you don't perform that well, it's fine.
It's
So if something else in your normal, I don't think normal is the right word. In your typical life, your
Mhm.
typical day to day goes wrong, you have a little bit more resilience against, like, well, that's okay. Like, I can figure it out, right? And
Right.
by confidence, I don't mean like the confidence of like, I know everything's going to go perfect all the time and I'm the best, but more, this confidence facing uncertainty and going like, I'm not 100% sure how this is going to turn out, but
Mhm.
I feel like I'm going to be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest benefits,
Mhm.
I think, of stepping out of your comfort zone, even if you don't end up finding like, oh, this entirely new life is much better and I want to do this instead. Just having that confidence to face uncertainty
Yeah.
is very, very useful.
Totally. Great. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Do you have any final thoughts?
I think that's pretty much it. Just a couple key highlight points
Mhm.
of just basically really get concrete about
Yeah.
the things that you're afraid of, and it will make it a little easier to start moving out of your comfort zone. And then once you have momentum, it's all easier and easier from there.
Mhm. Totally. Yes. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. And if you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.